You're listening to episode 73 of the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Dr. Celeste Holbrook about how Christian women can get reconnected to their sexuality and overcome sexual shame. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm a registered dietitian and coach trained in functional medicine with a passion for helping women just like you ditch perfectionism and use food, fitness, and self-care to fuel your bigger God-given purpose. I believe that it's possible to achieve your biggest life-changing goals without the frustration, obsession, or negative self-talk that so many women subject themselves to every day. All you need are the right tools, the right mindset, and the faith to turn your dreams into reality. I'm here to guide you along the way. The truth is that you are so much more than a body, and I'm on a mission to help you change the way you think and act at a core beliefs level so you can transform your physical, mental, and spiritual health from the inside out. Are you ready to become fed and fearless in your pursuit of a healthy, meaningful life? Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm your host as always, and we have a very spicy episode for you today, all about sex. And it's something that a lot of us don't have a lot of conversations about. Even those of us who are married, it's not something that we are talking about on a regular basis. And for me personally, sex has been something that has definitely been a work in progress in my marriage. I waited until I got married to have sex with my husband, but I also had sex previously outside of marriage because I was not a Christian until 2012. So before 2012, I was sexually active, like pretty much average American woman. And after 2012, after becoming Christian, I decided that I was not going to have sex again until I got married. So after getting married, I think like many women, I was thinking sex was going to be amazing. I was so excited. I was very attracted to my husband, and it was not that experience when we first had sex, unfortunately. And it created a lot of challenges in my sex life that I had to learn how to overcome. And now, 3.5 years into marriage, things are a lot better. And of course, still very attracted to my husband and love him and have a great relationship with him. But now we get to enjoy sex together more, which is really great. And the stuff that we talk about on the episode today is all things that have really been helpful for me over the last several years, learning how to enjoy sex with my husband and really unlearning a lot of the stuff that I learned as a teenager, in college, and then as a new Christian. So all of that to say, we have a really awesome guest. Today I have with me Dr. Celeste Holbrook. Dr. Celeste is a sexologist, speaker, and author. Through her work designing sexual and spiritual strategies, she helps her clients evolve into the woman they were created to be. She covers a variety of topics from sex drives, sexual shame, creating better connections, wellness, and so much more. Her mission is to educate women on how to improve their relationship and sex life, as well as grow in confidence, spirituality, and love. Dr. Celeste has been featured in Women's Health Magazine, Mother of Preschoolers, Reader's Digest, and many more. So Dr. Celeste is really cool. She is a Christian sexologist. I feel like that's a very unusual combination, and that's why I was so excited to have her on the show today. I think you're going to learn a lot. It's definitely a conversation that I would be wearing headphones for, especially if you are in public or around your kids. It's just something you might want to keep a little private since we use some words that maybe you haven't said in front of your kids before, or you might feel a little embarrassed listening to in front of other people. Not that you should feel ashamed, but I just want to make sure you're prepared with those headphones so that you can enjoy this episode and not worry about other people listening in on the conversation. So all of that said, I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed recording it and learned a lot myself. So without further ado, here is Dr. Celeste Holbrook. All right, everybody. Well, I am so excited to have with us on the show today, Dr. Celeste Holbrook. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast, Celeste.
Thank you, Laura. I'm truly so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I am very excited about this conversation because as I was mentioning to Dr. Celeste before we started the recording, I talked a little bit about this particular topic a million years ago before COVID, before everything else was focused on either the COVID or the election. And a lot of people reached out to me with feeling like so glad that I'd said something or feeling like they needed more information or needed support around this. So I'm super pumped to have her on the show. I know, even with an hour conversation, there's going to be a lot that we don't get to cover. So hopefully you guys will get to connect with Celeste outside of this conversation if you want to learn more. But today we're going to be talking about sex.
Yay!
And how to enjoy sex, how to eliminate shame around sex, and how to really reconnect with your sexuality in your marriage and to be able to enjoy sex with your husband. So I always like to give my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves to the audience if they don't know you. So can you just tell us your story, especially about how you became a sexologist?
Yes, absolutely. It's my favorite story. So I grew up in a very conservative town in Texas, and my husband and I decided to wait until we were married to have penetrative sex. And so that's neither here nor there. We can talk about more about that later. But when I finally did get married, I got married in Austin in the morning because my daddy always said, if you get married in the morning, if it doesn't work out, you haven't wasted the whole day. So we got married in the morning, walked on over to our hotel room and had sex for the first time. And, right before this, I was like peeling off my fake eyelashes and like my Spanx and the chicken cutlet, strapless, backless bra thing, it was real sexy. And then we had sex for the first time and it was terrible. It was so bad. It was very painful. So I had really, really painful sex. And I thought, okay, maybe it's just because I'm 26 and maybe just like I have a rusty vagina or something. Maybe I just need to try more. And so we kept trying, but it never got better. It didn't get better the entire first year of our marriage. And it was very hard on our marriage. I started experiencing things like shame that I wasn't living up to what I thought a wife should live up to in the bedroom. I experienced resentment. I was angry at him for wanting sex. And all of those things are really hard on a new marriage. And so after the first year, I went to an OB-GYN who did a full examination. And he said, Celeste, I can't find anything physically wrong here. I bet all of this pain would go away as soon as you have a baby, which is a terrible answer, right? It's a terrible answer because babies don't fix anything.
To any question.
Right, to any question.
If anyone ever says have a baby as the solution, just run.
It's just like, no, that's not the solution. No. And really what I needed is somebody to come alongside of me and hold my hand and say, listen, I see that you're angry. I see that you're resentful. I see that you didn't get a great sex education growing up. And so we're going to work on all of these things so that you can experience sex that's liberated. But I didn't have that at the time. So I didn't know it, but that moment was really the moment where things shifted for me. And I started to become the person in the career that I have now, because I just decided I'm going to learn everything there is to learn about sex. I was already getting a PhD in health education. And so I added sexual behavior to that. And really through education and understanding my own body better, I started to have sex that was less and less painful, and eventually not just not painful, but actually pleasurable and connective and intimate and all of the things that really we want sex to be. So not long after that, I thought, if I could figure this out for myself, probably there's one other person out there who experiences painful sex, and maybe I can help them. Using my background in health education and behavior, maybe I could help somebody else move through the process of figuring out painful sex. And so here we are, 13 years later.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I don't love that was your experience, but I think it's great that you can use that now to just inspire this career that you've pursued. And I know you're helping a lot of people because I think it's way more common than probably what we talk about. It's not exactly the most exciting conversation to be having with people. And I think even, thinking about my own situation, even talking to people that I'm very close with, like there's not really a lot of people that I would be very comfortable having that conversation with. So just knowing that there is a professional out there that's helping people with this is really awesome. And so I think we should probably start with the shame piece because I'll be as honest as I feel like my husband would want me to be on this conversation, but neither my husband nor I were virgins when we got married. I got saved in 2012, so I was 25 or 26 when I got saved, and my husband has been a Christian since he was like in the womb probably, but he got saved when he was 7. But he is previously married. So he was divorced. And so both of us had sex before. So it wasn't like something that I didn't know what to expect or had dealt with this like purity culture situation. But I know that a lot of women that are Christian grew up in that purity culture era, especially if they're about my age, like, late 20s, mid 30s kind of thing. And I can guess a lot of reasons why that would create some issues around having sex. So why don't we start with that conversation? Because I know that, a lot of Christian women out there have had that purity culture experience, and it probably affected a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that we're just going right into shame at the very beginning. This is really exciting for me. So Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers is one of my favorite sexologists, and she talks about how she thinks that the original shame that we feel as people is asexual type shame, because when we're between a year and 18 months old, we start reaching for our genitals and touching our genitals, and a parent or a caregiver will typically say, "Don't touch yourself," or "Don't do that. That's dirty." So even when no parent or guardian or adult has even talked to you about masturbation, a lot of people, like when they self-explore for the first time, just as children do, feel shame about it because of that early initiation to thinking that you shouldn't touch yourself. And so shame starts really, really early. Sexual shame does. And because we live in a society that doesn't talk about sex in clear language, doesn't talk about sex in terms of pleasure, we typically only teach sex in terms of reproduction. It is very easy for us to feel shame because shame happens when there is still things that need to be illuminated, right? Shame happens when things go in the dark, basically. So for me, and I'll speak to my experience, I grew up in a home and a situation where sex wasn't really talked about in my community, in my school. And if it was talked about, it was very much like, it's dangerous. You're going to get pregnant. You're going to get an STI. You can't do that. Bad things are going to happen to you. And so when we feel things that are very natural, like sexual feelings, sexual desire, feeling sexual in general, sensual even, we start to feel like we ourselves must be broken or bad because of having those thoughts that we have been told are bad thoughts, are dangerous thoughts. And so that's how sexual shame kind of forms for us. And it happens especially for women because we're kind of policed, like told not to wear certain things because it's too sexual, or told that we're kind of in charge of other people's stumbling blocks or whatever. So women especially experience a lot of shame because we get it from both ways then. Then now, after you're married, you're supposed to be some vixen and you're supposed to just know how to do all this sexual stuff. And so we're shamed for being sexual, and then we're shamed for not being sexual enough. So we can't really win in terms of sexual shame. And so tons and tons and tons of people experience sexual shame. If you don't know if you're experiencing it, it might come out sideways in low libido or pain or feeling like you're not sexy enough or like you don't look good enough for sex, or all of these kind of yucky feelings that get in the way of you and pleasurable connective sex.
Mm-hmm. And then specifically with the Christian community, I know we were talking before we hit record about like the whole purity culture thing. And I didn't get raised in that because I was mentioning to you, I didn't really have much religious anything until I was in my mid-20s. But I know that there are a lot of people that did go through that. So can you just talk a little bit about like, what is purity culture? I don't know if it's still, maybe it is still a really big thing. I know there was like an era where it was like super popular, but what is purity culture in the church, and what kind of effects can that have on women, especially like, even if they are saving themselves, I even hate saying it that way, but even if they're choosing to abstain from sex until marriage, how can that purity culture show up as shame in their sex life when they're married?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll start out by saying it can be an incredibly empowering thing to save certain sex acts like penetrative sex for a certain time, a certain place, and a certain person. That in and of itself is not problematic at all. But when we grow up in circumstances where we, especially as women in purity culture, we're told that we hold the keys to men's arousal, that can cause a lot of shame. So let's talk a little bit first about the history of purity culture. So all the people in the 60s and 70s that were in the free love movement and those sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? They all had kids in the 80s and 90s, and they wanted to do something different. And so the evangelical church started this marketing movement called True Love Waits. And True Love Waits is where you kind of go to these conferences and you sign a pledge card and you promise not to have sex until you're married. And sex defined by them is kind of ambiguous, but we typically think of it as penis and vagina or penetrative sex. And so there were also all of these offshoots of things like daddy-daughter balls and purity rings where it's like a ring that you wear until you get your engagement ring. But there weren't, purity culture hunting trips or purity culture pocket knives. And so it was definitely something marketed to women. And so the idea or the message behind it was sex is going to be better, or people are going to want you more or love you more, or you're going to be better. You're going to be more saved, more pure if you wait until you're married to have sex. But what that does is that gives an underlying message that sex is bad or dangerous until you do it with this one person. It also gives the underlying message that your body is what is most important and that you save your body for somebody else in a marriage situation. And so it is a different type of objectification. We're making her a flower, a stumbling block, a chewed up piece of gum, or all of these other kind of analogies that we had for women growing up in purity culture, which essentially does the same thing as when we objectify women for being too sexual, which also causes a lot of shame. So growing up in purity culture can really harmfully affect somebody even long after they're married, because you can't just tell somebody that sex is wrong and bad and dirty for 20 some odd years and then expect their brain to flip a switch and their body to go, oh yes, this is exactly what I thought and I wanted. And I'm so good at this now, right? You can't expect bodies to do that. That's not how they work. And so that's how purity culture, in a nutshell, creates lots of problems and can create lots of problems in marriage. And again, I do want to say, it's not choosing abstinence because that feels like an empowering choice to you, right? It is choosing abstinence because I feel like something bad is going to happen if I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like having not grown up in that circumstance, even what you were saying before about like sex ed in high school and everything, like it was always about, I feel like all they were focused on was the plethora of protection options. And I might have been in a pretty progressive high school because I think, in the early 2000s, a lot of people were like abstinence only kind of education. And so in my high school, it was very much like teaching how to prevent STDs, STIs, that kind of thing. And I'm trying to think if I ever got any sort of education about the enjoyment of sex or because at the end of the day, I mean, other than watching movies or, this isn't something I did, but I know in high school, some of my friends were watching porn. I'm not really sure where else you would learn any of that information as a person that wasn't having sex, right? It's like, where are you supposed to get the information about how to operate if nobody's even talking to you about it, or if the only things you're hearing is either don't have it because you'll be a bad person or your soul will be damaged if you do, or, if you are going to do it, just make sure, use one of these products, right?
Yes, exactly. It's exactly right. Yeah. We teach, even in a lot of somewhat comprehensive sex ed programs, we teach fear-based sex ed. when really we have this beautiful opportunity. And I think within the church, we have a beautiful opportunity to teach love-based sex ed, because 97% of the sex you're having is not for reproduction. And so we have this big, we even call it, this is how babies are made, when really this is how you connect and find pleasure with a partner. And so we have a lot of room to grow in this area of helping kids embrace sex as something that's pleasurable and connective and intimate instead of something to be scared of.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other things that you feel like women deal with when it comes to sexual shame? I know you mentioned women having body image issues or not feeling sexy. Like, is that pretty universal culture-wise, or do Christian women have a different type of experience of that? What's your experience?
Yeah, a large majority of my clients are Christian, or at least grew up in a Christian culture. So I might be speaking just only from my clientele, but I feel like when we grow up, here's a good example. When we grow up with our bodies being policed in purity culture, like you can't, wear spaghetti straps, or you might be a distraction, or you can't wear your skirt too short because you might cause somebody to stumble. You're essentially telling that woman that her body is responsible for the arousal of men. And that becomes problematic when you get married or when you choose to start having sex, because you feel solely responsible for his pleasure. When in reality, sex is two individual people owning their own pleasure and co-creating this really awesome sexual experience. Not how sexy I am determines the goodness or the pleasure of the entire experience. And so, yeah, there are some things that I think Christian women experience, not that outside of Christianity, you don't experience body policing, because we do, but there are some specific things that Christian women experience that directly tell us that our bodies are responsible for the pleasure of a sexual experience. And that's a hard mental cycle to break, for sure.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but it is something, like you said, whether it was just culture in general. Like, I know when I was in high school, there was the rule that if you had your hands right, like straight down and facing all the way, like extended fingers, that your shorts had to be at least that long. And like the spaghetti strap thing, I feel like I see kids dress these days and I'm like, wow, they must like not have dress policies at school anymore, because they're just wearing like the midriff shirts and everything. It's like they would have been sent home in my school if that was, 15 years ago. So, but I feel like I never thought about the fact that those kind of cultural things actually create this belief that women are there for the man's pleasure. And I do think that that belief of my body is for his pleasure is like probably one of the biggest issues. And I know it was something that not that my husband ever felt like made me feel that way, but that was something that I think I really had to like let go of when I was having sex with my husband, because it was like, wow, this isn't just about him feeling good or like making him enjoy this experience. Like, this is for both of us. And I can figure out how to make this fun for me too. And I can tell him how to help me make it feel fun.
Exactly. And I love that. And I love that you have figured that out, but a lot of women haven't, or don't figure out how to liberate from those ideas that I am the one who makes sex good or not good. And like, no, this is like a co-creative process. We're both going to figure out what feels good for us. And then we're going to share that with each other so that we can both have a lot of fun and feel connected and feel intimate. But that's a lot of the reason why people come to see me, is that they don't feel liberated. Because what happens when you feel like you're the one responsible for making sex good, sex becomes a chore. So if sex ever has been something on the to-do list to check off, maybe let's reassess how much pleasure you're actually having in the sexual experience,
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if something's enjoyable, you don't usually have to like force yourself to do it, right? Or like, put it on your to-do list. It's something that you're just interested in doing because it's fun or it's, enjoyable, that kind of thing. I mean, nobody has to put eating chocolate on their to-do list, right? So if it was really enjoyable, you probably wouldn't have to do that. And I feel like one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the call today is because I think sometimes women, and especially, I don't think it's just Christian women, but I do think that Christian women do tend towards this belief that, again, sex is not for them, that it's for their husband, and that it's their like wifely responsibility to like make sure their husband is happy and all of that. And I don't like, luckily I'm not in that situation, but I'm sure it's very common. And my perspective is that a healthy sex life is important for your marriage. And it's not just like to keep your husband happy. It's actually to create that deeper connection. But I would just love to hear from you why this is something worth overcoming for women who are feeling either shame or disinterest, or like they're just not excited about sex. Why is this something that would be worth putting effort into?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think we ought to address first why somebody might be feeling that way. So I think this could be helpful for your listeners. There are two different types of arousal. There's responsive arousal and spontaneous arousal. So spontaneous arousal is what we typically think of when we think of arousal, which is I feel aroused, so I go seek out sexual behavior. That's like the typical linear path that we see a lot of people go on, or we see that in movies. That's typically how we see people get horny, right? But a whole bunch of us experience responsive arousal, meaning I may never out of the blue feel like having sex or desire sex, but once I get into that sexual scenario, then my body is like, oh yeah, this is what I want. This feels really good. I really like it. And so a lot of women put themselves down or think that that type of arousal isn't valid. Like somehow, if I don't think about sex out of the blue, I must not want my partner or I must not desire him, right? When really you just have to get into a sexual scenario and then the arousal shows up. So separating desire for sex from desire for partner is very important, because being a sexual person is not about how much you want sex. It's about how pleasurable the sex is that you can create. So it's okay if you don't want sex out of the blue all the time. That's okay. The second thing is that responsibility is the biggest killer of arousal. So what happens is when we feel like we're responsible for sex or for sex being good, it actually kills your arousal and your desire for sex. I know it's so like, how do we even have sex ever? So eliminating that pressure for you making sex happen or making it good is one of the first ways that you can kind of walk through to the other side and kind of liberate from those expectations of you and of sex, and making sex something that actually is, again, connective and intimate. Here's the thing. Sex is a skill that you learn, just like cooking. I actually think there's a lot of similarities between nutrition and sex. We could probably have a whole conversation about this. Sex is a skill that you learn. It is biological. We are created to have sex just like we are created to eat, but you still have to learn how to cook. You still have to learn how to have sex. And so you're going to learn and relearn how to have sex over the course of your life, even if it's with the same person. Like if you're going through menopause or grief or body changes or all of this stuff, you learn how to have sex again. So it is okay that sometimes it's hard. That's the process of learning, just like nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard it explained that way, that like, even though it's a biological process, you still have to learn how to do it. Because I think sometimes people assume, oh, like people didn't have to like learn all this stuff 2,000 years ago, right? Like they just had sex. And I would imagine that there was some element of conversation that happened back then. But I do think maybe they didn't have as much pressure on themselves and they were just like, oh, we'll figure this out. Like this just is, this is life kind of thing. So I never really thought about it that way, that we have this expectation that we're supposed to be good at it like right away, and that it should be easy and natural. And like, because I feel like the movies always make it, whenever I watch a sex scene in a movie, which is not very often anymore, but when I do, and it's just like this guy like throwing the woman against the wall, and it's like, I'm like, oh, that just like looks so uncomfortable. And like, is that even fun? I'm like just kind of laughing about it because they make it look so easy. And like, it doesn't matter what position you're in. It's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I think like you get all these messages from culture about what it should look like. And then if you follow what you think normal sex looks like based on what you're seeing in a movie or, wherever you're learning about it from, then when you're in the situation with your partner, it's almost like you follow these like unwritten rules that nobody technically taught you. And you're like, wait, why am I doing this way? Like, why do we have to be in this position just because this is like the right position or whatever? So it's just kind of weird. I don't know. Or, it's like stuff that you don't think you're learning, but you actually are learning.
You totally are learning. And I'm so glad you bring this up about movies or porn or wherever you see sex, right? Because we learn from that because we don't have comprehensive sex ed, right? If you don't see sex on a movie or in pornography, you're not going to see it typically, unless you walk in on your parents, which is typically like a kind of traumatic event. And so because we don't have comprehensive sex ed, movies, media provide you some sort of litmus test or comparison with which we all compare ourselves to their bodies, to what positions they're doing, to what sounds they're making. Have you ever considered or thought about how we learn how to sound in sex? Like 100 years ago, probably nobody ever thought about learning how to sound in sex. They just did their sounds.
Yeah. Well, before like movies existed, you wouldn't have really seen it unless, like you said, if you were living in a culture that, I mean, I feel like I saw a movie one time where it was Eskimos or something or like Native Americans, and the entire family was in the hut together.
Yeah.
And like the mom and dad were having sex and the kids were just like asleep next to them. So it's like, I would imagine that would have been relatively common up until, modern times, right?
Totally. And that's something that we talk about sometimes is that when we were single community households, with everybody in one room, like it was not uncommon to hear your parents having sex. And that was quite honestly, probably a better way to learn about sex than watching TV. Because it's like normalized and sometimes people fart and like it sounds really funny sometimes. And that's just kind of a common experience versus like what you were talking about before. It makes me really, really cringe and laugh when movies like shows like Grey's Anatomy, they're having sex in the on-call room and all this really random, very illegal things at the hospital are going on, right? Because I'm married to a physician and let me tell you, those on-call rooms are disgusting. Like you would never want to have sex in one of those rooms.
Mm-hmm. Or like the Mile High Club. I'm like, anytime I go into a bathroom on a plane, I'm like, why would anyone ever choose to have sex here? It's like, I don't even want to go to the bathroom in here.
Right. This is the opposite of sexy.
So yeah, it's one of these, like, you don't realize the things that you're picking up. You don't realize what you're learning. And then, like I said, even when you're having sex, even if you have a great relationship with your husband, you're not thinking actively about like, oh, why is my brain thinking that this was what we should be doing? Or why is this the way that I'm acting or operating or something? And for me, a lot of what I've learned after being married for like 3.5 years is like, I have to almost like empty my brain as much as possible while we're having sex, because and a lot of times for me, it's usually more about like thinking about things I need to do when we're done, which is really terrible. But it's like, and my husband knows this. He's like, are you paying attention? Or he's like,
you zone out.
Are you here? Yeah. So it's one of these things where, and that's a skill that I don't think it's like, you're not going to just naturally be good at like mentally turning off things that are, even just normal day-to-day life things, let alone these messages that are even maybe subliminal in your head about what sex should look like or how you should be acting. And I think just thinking back to like before I was Christian and when I was sexually active in college, I think my whole mindset around it was always, how do I make this guy enjoy this? Like that was 100% of what I was thinking about. And it's really sad to think like that was my mindset. But, just interestingly, what you were saying before about the connection to nutrition, that was also a period of time in my life where my focus in fitness and exercise and eating and everything was always about looking better and being more attractive.
Preach.
So it is interesting how those things connect, because nowadays, like I eat and exercise to feel good. And yeah, I like to look like I don't, dislike having muscle tone or something.
Pressure, right. You can't escape that pressure from society to look a certain way, but yeah.
Right. But even just like feeling good and energetic and taking care of my body and stuff like that then also connects with the way that I see sex now, which is, an opportunity to connect with my husband, to feel good, to, sometimes it's like, oh, like I forget what it was the other day. Like I had a headache or something. I was like, maybe sex will actually help this, and it did. And so it's like this kind of thing where you start thinking more about like, how can I enjoy this, or how can this be good for the both of us, not just the partner. And I feel bad saying this, but now I rarely think about whether my husband's going to enjoy it or not, because I'm like, he's pretty easy to please. So like, I don't even like, I just got to show up if he's going to enjoy it. So then I can really focus on my own enjoyment, which hopefully he's not listening. Hopefully his mom's not listening.
No, he's probably really excited about this. And this is so healthy, Laura. And I'm so glad you're willing to talk about this, because it gives other people permission, right, to talk about it and to be okay with it. And I love that you're willing to say these things, because I believe as women, we have to pave this road, right? Men aren't going out of their way to make sure that we feel some certain way, because they've never felt that way, right? It's okay that you don't often think about, or maybe not often, but sometimes you aren't thinking about your partner's pleasure because your partner was never told not to speak up about sex. If he's not feeling pleasure, he's going to say something, So that's totally okay. Something you said earlier that I thought was really interesting, and I think we could talk more about, is when you have all of those things roaming around in your mind and you're kind of spectating the situation or the sex instead of really being in the space. That goes back to responsibilities being the biggest killer of arousal. And that's sometimes we just can't shut our brains off. So here's one thing that, maybe your listeners can be into or try when you have those responsibilities rolling around in your head, is to focus on or tether to one of your senses. So our sensuality is essentially the use of our five senses. It's nothing more than that. It's not intrinsically sexual. It's just our senses. And so when you feel your brain thinking about you're having sex and all of a sudden you're thinking, I think I need to paint the ceiling linen instead of cotton, right? Come back to one of your senses. Like, how does your skin feel? Do you feel the air of the fan on your butt? How does the kiss taste? How does, are you experiencing a candle? Whatever you can do to be back in your body, to embody, is how you come back to presence. Because in presence, in this moment, you can't be worried about the past or the future. Anxiety only exists in thoughts of future or past. So when you embody and get into your present moment, you can release some of that anxiety and those responsibilities and really experience present sex and present sexuality. And I am a person of faith, a woman of faith. And I also think that this is how we experience presence of the Holy Spirit, is when we embody and really focus on being in the here and now. Like, I am the great I am. So just a side note, I think there's lots of really interesting things about sensuality that help us experience a grander, more holy experience.
Yeah. Well, I think just that ability to stay in the moment, I hate to admit it, but I'm awful at it. And it's something that I really have to work on, because I'm always thinking ahead of like, what do we need to do? Like, and my husband's great at it. He's Mr. Why are you worried about this right now? I was like, because somebody's got to worry about it.
You aren't.
Yeah, exactly. It's terrible. But yeah, I think and I know there's some level of design with men being able to focus a lot more versus women tend to be I don't really believe in multitasking, but you have the ability to be aware of things that are happening outside of the situation, which I think is great for keeping children alive, basically.
Correct. Yes.
But it is something where, I totally agree with that process of really honing in focused attention on some part of the experience. And for me, a lot of times it's more about the physical sensations and really paying attention to it. And that generally does help me enjoy sex a lot more. Big surprise, right? Actually paying attention to what's happening. But it is something that I feel like if you're not careful and you're not paying attention, it's really easy to just kind of zone out and just be like, oh, whatever, he's having a good time. When he's done, we're done and it's over kind of thing. And I just feel like, again, sex beyond being for reproductive purposes, why even bother having it if you're not going to be present for it? And I honestly think most men probably care too if you're actually present, right? It's not like they're oh, she's just there for me and whatever she's doing, I don't even care. I know my husband really wants me to enjoy it and wants us to be connected, which is really great. And so we worry so much about like, what does my belly look like or what? And I really don't care about that stuff anymore. So I can't really say that I care. But, I think a lot of women are so focused on what do I look like? Or, did I shower or like, all that stuff. And they're not actually even engaging with it as like an experience. And I think that isn't, what your husband generally wants either. Like he wants you to be there for it. He doesn't want you worried about if your legs are shaved or whatever.
Totally. It becomes a performance instead of an experience. And I think that goes back to telling us since we were little that our body is the most important thing. The way we look is the most important thing. So it transfers into how you eat, how you have sex, how you exercise, all of it. And just thinking that because we're, with somebody we love doesn't mean that those messages aren't still coming through and still impacting the way that you experience sex, that body checking and the feeling that if I'm not pretty enough or if I'm not, sexy enough, that this experience isn't going to be good. And that's just not true.
So just to kind of shift gears a little bit, so we talked a lot about the shame and like the, mindset piece around sex, but something that I think you had mentioned a little bit before we started recording, and I was kind of talking about this. There is also the physical element that sometimes can make sex difficult. And I don't know if I had a similar experience to you, but the first time my husband and I had sex, I was literally like laying in the bathtub crying afterwards because it was so painful. It turns out that I actually had a yeast infection that had it was like asymptomatic. So I didn't even know I had it. And then having sex was what like, oh, there it is.
There
like
it is.
that's very, very painful. So, and I was having not been a virgin. I was like, is it just because I haven't had sex in like 5 years? Like what is wrong with like that situation? So I feel like I had a little bit of like a traumatic reentry into my sex life when we got married. And there was a lot of like, it took a long time to kind of recover from that, even like from like a little T trauma perspective. But I know that there's a lot of women out there that experience physical challenges around sex, even if their brain is like, I'm excited, I'm confident in my body, all of that stuff, but then they're still having problems with enjoying sex. What would be some of those common problems that women experience that prevents them from enjoying sex from a physical perspective?
Yeah. When it comes to pain, I always say that pain is both a physical and a psychological response. Like pain is your brain telling you that something is wrong. So pain from things like vaginal dryness or vaginismus or vulvodynia, or or what you're talking about, like having a UTI or yeast infection, all of these things can be present when somebody experiences pain. But like my case, some of that is not present at all. It's just the mental working through that your body has been told sex is dangerous your whole life. So it tries to shut it down so it doesn't happen. And so it creates pain, right? So there's always going to be some sort of mix of physical and psychological. And to put it all in one category isn't going to fully help you move through. One of the things that I think is really interesting or helpful to do when we're thinking about how to make sex better in general, if you're having pain or if you're experiencing like low libido or low arousal, is to do an awareness exercise. And that's where you and your partner, it's great to do it together, sit down, spend 90 seconds writing down, in my dream sexual scenario, I would be feeling, and then write the list of feelings: pleasure, connection, loved, desired, excited, erotic, whatever it is that you would be feeling. And then they do the same. And then you look at your list and see what is similar and what is different and things like that. But when you start with your feelings, what you want to feel, then you can start to build in behaviors behind it. So then you can start to say like, well, what are the things that help me feel pleasure? What are the things that help me feel excited? Anytime we behave in any certain way, we do it because we want to feel something. So starting with your feeling and working backward is really helpful. And I say that because if you are experiencing painful sex right now, start with the feeling and then build in behaviors that help you feel that feeling. For example, if you experience pain with penetration and you want to feel pleasure, then start doing the things beyond penetration, outside of penetration, that help you feel pleasure. And then you can start working towards penetration again in a slow, strategic way. But you have to start making connections from your body to pleasure in sex. because what happens when we experience pain with sex is that your body associates all sexual things with pain. So we're trying to disassociate pain from all sexual touch. And so you do that by figuring out what helps you feel pleasure and then doing a lot of those things, outer course, grinding, oral sex, all of the things that help you feel really good, and then start to build penetration back in, or whatever the pain point is, back in again.
Yeah, I can imagine like something that came to mind is if one of the things you want to feel is being relaxed. And I'm kind of laughing because I used to read Cosmo when I was in like high school and college.
Yeah, because who didn't read Cosmo? That's the best.
Well, and they would always teach these, like, they have like this is the position that's going to drive him wild or whatever. And they always have these like crazy positions. And I was just thinking about the fact that like, if I want to feel relaxed during sex, there's a lot of positions that have been like taught that are awful and I hate them and they're very uncomfortable, or like I have to be like gripping so that I don't like fall off the bed or something. And that certainly does not help me feel relaxed when I'm having sex. So it's just one of these things where, if you think, oh, well, that's the position that we're supposed to do it in, like you might actually be creating something that feels really uncomfortable because you're, following this unwritten rule versus, like, I'm not going to go into a ton of details, but there's like, me and my husband have this one position that's like very bizarre. It's not like one that I was ever taught, but we figured it out like, oh, this actually feels really good. And now that's like our go-to position because it's like, I know for a fact I'll be able to enjoy it. And so it's like, that's just what we do. It's kind of like our old reliable. So it is interesting because I think when you're thinking about sex from I need to make him feel good perspective, you're going to probably do things that would not be enjoyable to you because you think that's what you need to do to have your husband enjoy it. Whereas if you're thinking, what's going to make me feel good, you're opening up to like maybe I need to shift a position, or maybe we need to like do some extra stuff before we have sex so that I am comfortable and relaxed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's just shifting the perspective back to your own body, and comparison is the thief of joy. And that's very, very true in sex. And so, whatever Cosmo says could be great for somebody, but could be awful for you. And, that's the process of building and learning sex, is that you build it and learn it over time and you figure out what works for you and you have a position that works for you. And that's amazing. And it has nothing to do with, what works for somebody else. And that too is amazing. Again, more, I think, analogies with nutrition, probably.
Yeah. It's like, this diet might work well for someone and that's great. But if it doesn't work for you, then don't force yourself to do it. So are there any other things that people should be aware of? Like even just like medical challenges that maybe they should be looking into? Because for me, it ended up being a pelvic floor issue. That was, I don't know if it was, again, chicken or the egg scenario, if it was that experience when we had sex the first time that created that pelvic floor tension as a defensive response. I'm sure that was part of it. It's also possible I tend to be a little high strung, type A person, that I know people with my personality can develop hypertonic pelvic floor. So that's something that I would for sure, and we've had pelvic floor experts on the show. So, definitely might link to some episodes for people to listen to about pelvic floor health. But is there anything else from like a medical perspective that your clients have needed help with that was going to help them enjoy sex more?
Yeah. Well, I do always like to teach about reverse Kegeling because here's my thing. When we are taught to Kegel or Kegel, both are correct forms of the term. When we're taught to Kegel, which is basically tighten your pelvic floor and close and clamp down on those PC muscles, that can be really helpful for things like incontinence, and it really does make strong muscles. But if you experience pain with sex, you don't want a tight, closed vagina. You don't. You want a beautifully aroused, open vagina. And so reverse Kegeling is something that I teach a lot of my clients to do. And that's actually the opposite of a Kegel. It's down and out and open, so that you can push blood down into the erectile tissue in your clitoris and in your vagina. And so it tense and it's nice and open. Women need at least 13 to 20 minutes of non-penetrative play to get aroused enough for penetration. Most of us don't spend that much time because penis owners typically need only 3 minutes to get fully aroused. So, because of that gap, we need to make sure that you're spending 13 to 20 minutes getting fully aroused, because your vagina will actually tent and kind of open up and be more ready for penetration in that amount of time. If you're trying to have penetration when you're not fully aroused, it's going to hurt. It just is going to hurt because it's just not ready. So practice your reverse Kegels, everybody. And that is like, pushing down and out, like you're maybe pushing out a baby or getting a tampon out. You might fart. That's normal. That's okay. But practicing that can help push the blood to the area and help get your vagina more tented and more open. Also, we're taught a lot about the benefits of having a tight vagina, but that's really not for you. That's typically for a penis owner. So give yourself some credit and have a nice blossoming open vagina so that you feel a lot of pleasure during sex as well.
I know it's so annoying that that's like the message. And I feel like that's more from pop culture for sure. A lot of jokes being made about that in things that I've seen. And it is funny how it's like, actually, that's not like really what we want. And there's really no benefit to being like that. And not, obviously that's not to make people feel ashamed about anything, but it's more just like, why is it always about what the man is going to enjoy? Why don't we talk about like, oh, women, if you're feeling like that, that's not actually beneficial for you and you shouldn't expect to feel like that. And there's just so much stuff. I just want to like,
I know,
get rid of like, TV or something. Cause it's like, that's where you learn all of it.
It is true.
So just to talk a little bit about some practical stuff, because at the end of the day, like I want people to feel empowered to be able to take action on what they're learning. Hopefully the conversation has kind of like helped people, realize, first of all, that they're not alone. Second of all, that a lot of the stuff is normal, that talking about it is perfectly fine. Like we don't have to be all weird about it all the time. But just as far as some actual like practical things that that women could actually try implementing if they want to start feeling more enjoyment out of sex or being able to feel that physical pleasure more, because like you said, even just a minute ago, the reverse Kegeling, that could be a strategy that someone plays around with and sees if that helps. So are there any other practical things women can do to enjoy sex more if they are having a hard time with it?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of really, really easy things. First of all is framing. So framing is the idea that you want to be in an environment that is conducive for sex. Environment is very important in sex and much more important than we ever give it credit for being. So if you have sex typically in your bedroom, my rule is if it doesn't help you feel dreamy or sexy, it doesn't belong in your bedroom. So if that's the work files that have to go or the pictures of your kids or whatever it is that reminds you of responsibilities, because responsibility is the biggest killer of arousal, get it out of your bedroom. Make your bedroom a really sacred sexual sensual space. Get the linens that you love, get the, whatever it helps you feel good, do it. The second thing is we just talked about 13 to 20 minutes of arousal. So make a playlist on your phone, make a lusty playlist and put songs on there that last between 13 and 20 minutes. Turn it on at the beginning of your sexual experience, but don't actually have penetration until you hear that first song again, so that you've spent enough time getting ready and your body is going to be more ready for sex. And so you're going to experience more pleasure for sex. You can actually get a lusty playlist off my website if you go and
nice.
like click on the link to get a lusty playlist. And then the last thing is to talk about sex more. We aren't educated in how to talk about sex. So typically our partners will ask us, "Hey baby, what do you want?" And that can be a really intimidating question if you're not super familiar with your own body. So talking about sex in ways that make more sense and are smaller chunks, like what view do you like during sex? And what can I do during the day to help you feel more sexual at night? Those types of conversations are much more helpful than, "Hey, baby, what do you want?" in the moment can be kind of intimidating. And I also have a freebie on my website, plug, I also have a freebie on my website that's 20 sex enhancing questions that are questions that help you have better conversations around sex.
Well, we'll definitely link to that so that people can check that out. And I think, I think in the moment, if somebody's like, well, what do you want? You're kind of like, I don't know. I don't know what I want. It's like, how do you answer that question? So I think having those other questions will be really valuable. One question I have, so I've learned before that because you were mentioning before about the responsive arousal rather than spontaneous. And I feel like, I know in my marriage, I think we're both people that are a little bit more on that responsive side of things. It's not like we're like, spontaneously like, let's go have sex or whatever. So what would you suggest for couples that have that more responsive sex? Like, should they schedule sex, or is it like, how do they make it happen if it's not something that they're spontaneously like thinking about?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'm so glad you asked this, because this is something that a lot of people experience. So if you experience responsive arousal, or if you both experience it more on the spectrum of responsive arousal, intentional sexuality is really something that I teach almost all of my clients to do. And that is a little bit beyond scheduling sex. Yes, it is having conversations about, hey, when would a good time to get sexual be this week? You're off work on Thursday. I can come home for lunch break. We know that neither of us love to have sex when we're super tired. So let's think about sex at lunch or in the morning, right? So being intentional about it instead of just waiting for the stars to align and everybody's, ready for sex is really tough. That's a really hard thing to do. So creating intentionality around sex can make sex happen more, and it can be so much better because you have thoughtfully looked into what environment and situation helps you get into sex. And so if you decide, oh, Thursday at lunch is a great time for us to be sexual together and for this to be a priority in our relationship, you both show up at lunchtime on Thursday, and there's not the weird, awkward gymnastics of, are we going to have sex? Are we not going to have sex? I think he's wanting to have sex, but I don't really want to, and I don't want to shut him down. Like, it eliminates all of that. And it just helps you get into the sexual script instead of spending so much time and effort and energy into, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? He's going to touch me, or he's not going to touch me, or she's going to touch me. So when you're intentional about that, you can also take it off the table on other days. So you can connect in physical touch without it leading to eroticism, which is what often so many couples lose, because either one or both of them, one or the other of them, is so worried or anxious about when sex is or is not going to happen, that any physical touch is unwanted because they think it's going to lead to sex. So when you make sex intentional, you can have all of those beautiful physical experiences without the pressure or the anxiety of if it's leading to sex, which ultimately helps the couple become more connected over time anyway.
Yeah. And I feel like that kind of ties back to that shame conversation around, like, if I get him aroused or whatever, it means I have to like finish the job or whatever. I feel like that was something I don't think we got taught, like actually taught. I think it was like you watch these like teen movies and stuff and they make jokes about it and everything. And it's like, so, I can imagine, because I think I've had that experience before where I felt bad. I was like, I don't really want to have sex right now. So like, am I a bad person if I like make out with my husband and then don't have sex? And is he going to have this like super, awful experience for the next couple of hours? And so luckily my husband and I have a very open communication style. So he's explained to me like, no, it's fine. Like, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. Like, you can't touch me. Or
Nobody
something
died of blue balls ever.
Yeah.
Not once, ever. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's an example of something where it's like, if you're afraid to even like kiss because, well, I don't want to, if I'm not in the mood to have sex right now, I don't even want to like get that thing started, then that I think can negatively affect the relationship too. So, but I do think planning for it, again, just myths versus actual realities. If you think, oh, well, sex isn't as fun or as sexy if I have to plan it. It's like, if you're always waiting for it to just like spontaneously come up, depending on the person. I mean, I think if in my relationship, I don't think we'd like have sex very often if we were just waiting for both of us to feel excited about having sex. So I think it has to be for probably a lot of people that they actually have some level of intentionality or planning around it.
Totally. Absolutely. One of my favorite sexologists, Cindy Darnell, says that spontaneous sex takes hours and hours and hours of anticipation, which I think is so beautiful, because a lot of people will come to the practice and be like, we wish sex was as spontaneous as it was when we were first together, And I say, okay, fair. But when you were first dating or first married, or when you were first having sex, you maybe were thinking about it a lot. Maybe you didn't have kids as responsibilities. Maybe you didn't have these demanding careers. And so sex was easier to get into, but that didn't mean that you weren't thinking about it or planning on it. If you knew you were going to see each other on a Thursday night, you sure were shaving your legs. I mean, spontaneous sex is like you're walking down the sidewalk and all of a sudden you're having sex. And that's not anything that anybody wants to have. But it felt more spontaneous, maybe because you were anticipating it so much more and you were thinking about it, and you had less responsibilities. So you can recreate that in your marriage without a whole lot of work, just a little bit of intentionality. It's not undoable to be excited about sex again.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been really fun to chat with you about this. Is there any last minute words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yes. I just want to tell all the women listening that you are enough just as you are. There's nothing you have to do to be better, to be more, to be anything but awesome. And you are just enough. That's it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to link to the freebie that you mentioned, as well as that playlist that you mentioned, so people can get those downloads. And then if people want to connect with you more, or, learn more about the way you work with clients, you want to tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Celeste Holbrook. And you can find me online at drcelesteholbrook.com. And I offer complimentary 30-minute discovery calls. So if you just want to get on a call and talk about what's going on, I may be able to point you in a right direction as far as how to move forward. And it might be consulting with me, which happens over Zoom, or it might be with something else. Maybe you need a trauma therapist or a pelvic floor specialist, but I can help direct you or be the conduit to the right information.
Awesome. And then the last question I have, which you may have already answered, but that is, what do you believe makes a person more than a body?
Wow. I would say the one thing that makes somebody more than a body is their purpose.
Love it. Short and sweet.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Celeste. It was really awesome to get to chat with you about this. And like I said, we'll make sure everyone has the links that they need to connect with you and get those awesome freebies. And I hope that this conversation has been helpful for those of you listening who are struggling with this, or, I feel like how many people don't, right? I think we all are dealing with stuff from our childhood, stuff from growing up, stuff from things that we learned along the way. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys who want to start enjoying sex more. So thank you for your time, and we will look forward to seeing you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Are you a dietitian or nutritionist business owner that wants to create an online business that consistently brings in dream clients who actually want to buy your services, but you're struggling to figure out the right business strategy to get there? Then keep listening, because I have a special limited time opportunity that's going to help you create the highly profitable and joy-filled nutrition business you always wanted. I'm excited to announce that my signature group coaching program, the Nutrition Business Accelerator, is now open until March 11th. In this one-of-a-kind coaching program created exclusively for nutrition and dietitian entrepreneurs, you'll learn how to start, grow, and scale your online nutrition business to 6 figures and beyond, so you can experience the financial and time freedom you desire. I created this program to help struggling dietitian and nutrition entrepreneurs get clarity on who they serve, how they serve them, and how they can stand out in a crowded market, so they can more easily attract dream high-paying clients into their online nutrition business. This program is for brand new nutrition business owners, as well as those who have been in business longer, and maybe even for a few years, but aren't getting the traction that they'd like to see in their growth. The program is based on foundational business building and marketing principles, not just tools like social media, so you can experience sustainable business growth that adapts to the constantly changing world of online business. Over the course of 12 weeks, I'll show you how to attract high-paying clients who are excited to work with you and willing to pay you the rates you deserve. You'll get training on how to effectively sell your services in a way that feels authentic and converts prospects into paying clients without feeling pushy or salesy. And you'll get step-by-step instructions on how to create programs and services that provide transformative results, leading to glowing testimonials and referrals from your current clients so you can have the greater impact you desire in the world around you. You'll also learn how to manage your time, energy, and resources so you can get more done in less time and experience that time freedom that you got into entrepreneurship for. If you want to make this your reality, Nutrition Business Accelerator is your pathway to achieve all of this and more. Get the proven strategy that has helped dozens of nutrition business owners start, grow, and scale their online business to $5,000 months, $10,000 months, and even beyond. Inside the program, you'll get mentorship and guidance from me, a compassionate coach who has built her own multi-six-figure online nutrition business, so you never have to feel stuck in your business again. If you're ready to join, go to lauraschoenfeld.com/NDA to learn more about the program and apply for your spot before doors close on March 11th. That's lauraschoenfeld.com/NBA, which is short for Nutrition Business Accelerator. Doors are open today, and you don't want to miss out on this one-of-a-kind business coaching opportunity. Let's accelerate your nutrition business together. I'll see you inside the program.